Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Salome Sega. I'm the director of New Ink, which is the New Museum's cultural incubator that supports creative practitioners working across art, design, technology, science, architecture, all of the things. I'm here to introduce our first keynote speaker of the day. Sara Zewde is founding principal of Studio Zewde, a design firm practicing landscape architecture, urbanism, and public art. Her practice is celebrated for design methods that bring culture, ecology, and craft in conversation. From being listed on Time Magazine's Time 100 Next to Architectural Digest AD 100, she's fixed her spot as someone to watch. We've invited Sara to kick off our social architecture track because in her practice, she demonstrates how place has layered histories bound to community. For Sara, design starts with people. Following her talk, we're gonna go right into our social architecture track presentations from 5 members. This is a track of designers, community organizers, and researchers who are thinking about ways to make social and public space more inclusive and horizontal. So we're gonna hear from In Good Company, Writ Large Projects, JUNTE, Anna Campbell, and then Emma Jurczynski. And then those presentations will be followed by a group panel conversation led by their mentor in residence, Isabel Flower. So with that, let's welcome Sara to the stage.
Good afternoon. Is this thing on? Thank you so much for having me today. Can I just get a show of hands? Who is familiar with landscape architecture? Okay, very educated crowd. A little bit about me. I was born and raised on the Gulf Coast, Louisiana and Texas, and it was this storm event that kind of propelled me towards my journey into landscape architecture. I watched this storm brew and barrel towards the Gulf Coast from my dorm room on in the Northeast, and it started me on a journey of searching for the kind of skill set, a disciplinary home, at least an orientation to, looking for ways to understand the collection of ecological, political, cultural, aesthetic factors that could produce a Hurricane Katrina and how I might intervene within that. So, although I found landscape architecture, the boundaries of the discipline felt very small and restrictive for the kinds of challenges that we are facing as a society today, in particular, my own cultural kind of orientation and looking for a more expansive set of cultural traditions to draw from when thinking about designing landscape. So I'll share with you a couple of the references that have been important to me in the development of my practice, and then I'll share a couple of projects with you. So Toni Morrison's work on memory and identity is really central to the way that I think about place. The idea that places are a collection of the things that they've been. And so understanding what a place has been is central to understanding what it can be. Sharifa Rhodes Pitts writes in her book, Harlem is Nowhere, she writes about the idea that Harlem is both a place and an idea. And while my studio is based in Harlem, where we actually, despite working on projects around the world, are also simultaneously always thinking about the world outside our window, the idea of a place being bigger than itself is really, I have found to be really resonant with, working with different communities around the world. People understand the places they live as having meaning. And so part of my work in any particular project or context is to understand what a place means to the people that live there. And finally, the work of Bell Hooks, who, she writes about the aesthetic of being, that design is not a word that was used in her home and wasn't in mine growing up. And yet I witnessed people in my home, in my community, in my neighborhood, fashioning lifeways every day. And so for me, understanding the ways in which people are designing active agents in the world around them is also important to expanding the way that I think about design in the landscape. So I am a practitioner. I have a practice of landscape architecture, but I also teach and research and write, and all of this is, I don't see as kind of separate parallel activities, but rather all compounded, all feeding one another around those kind of central inquiries that I shared with you. So I mentioned my office is in Harlem, and here we have a very diverse set of people working on the project of designing landscapes. Folks from soil science to the construction industry to textile designers to art historians and architects and landscape architects, all really coming together to think about how do we design the places that mean the most to us in an expansive way. And ultimately, it's about what we build in the landscape. So we are very committed to not only the project of design through modeling and through drawing, but execution of projects, because it is the textures, the materials, the qualities of the physical environment that ultimately makes people feel like they belong and makes a place feel like it belongs in its context. So I'll just share a couple of different projects that function at different scales to give you a sense of how I think about what social architecture can be. So this first project is in Columbus, Indiana. Anyone heard of Columbus, Indiana? Not Ohio. 2 people. All right. Pretty cool town. It's a town of, is somebody from Columbus, Indiana? Did I hear a woo? We got one person? Oh, no. All right. Well, it's a town of about 30,000 people in southern Indiana. And it headquartered, continues to headquarter Cummins Engineering. And Cummins had a CEO that believed that an investment in architecture in the public realm could be a kind of catalyst for civic engagement and democracy. That if we learned to value and invest in the public realm, that this could have an impact on how we understand each other and therefore how we understand our democracy. And so in this town so he established a foundation that continues to fund designers, architects from all around the world to come to Columbus and design and build, the kind of the everyday, mundane kind of pieces of a community. So things like the church and the fire station and the library and the post office are all these incredible architectural gems. And so for decades, this town has been testing out this theory. One such gem is Millrace Park, which you see here. It was opened about 30 years ago, and we were commissioned to design an installation that would be in dialogue with this legacy of this park to kind of celebrate its 30-year anniversary. So we started this, as we do with many of our projects, engaging the community. And we asked them on this map kind of to pin the places in this park where they have their most kind of significant memories. And what you'll see is that there's this concentration of the pins around this half-moon hill. And just next to it is this really empty festival, what's called Festival Field. It's an empty, large lawn. That mound, that hill, came up in so many stories and conversations with folks in the neighborhood. And as we dug into it, we learned that the original landscape architect designed this landform as a kind of call to the mound building traditions of Native people in this region, because Columbus sits in the middle of in the Ohio Hopewell mound building tradition. In this tradition, these circular mounds are constructed in the landscape to create a space of civic discourse, of politicking, of gathering, of ceremony, of ritual. This is the Native legacy of this land. And so we wanted to take that kind of half circle that's in the park that people already have these connections to and extend that into the empty field. So these are some early sketches thinking about, okay, we have this half landform. What can we do to kind of finish that circle off and recall this idea of a central civic space? So we started working with some just, rough study models, starting to ask ourselves this question. We were really interested in the idea of the half circle being something light and airy that can be occupied and activated and in dialogue with the landform, but something that you can physically occupy. We actually worked with the Parks Department to figure out the spacing so that we can get maintenance trucks and festival trucks and all these kinds of operations in here. And we tested this out at a one-to-one scale. We worked with bamboo growers in Georgia and South Carolina who drove to Columbus to help us build this thing. We, engaged the community in the actual installation. We painted the bamboo the exact Columbus town official red. So here are some images that you can see how we've kind of now created this new central space within the circle out into that once empty festival field. This gives you a sense of scale. This is about 100 people gathered underneath the structure. And you also get a sense of formally how it kind of recalls the form of the existing hill. And this thing has really, come to have a life of its own. So this was a Sister Hazel concert. Does anybody remember Sister Hazel? No, just me. I'm dating myself. Okay. So the structure was used to kind of as a kind of a VIP section for the concert. The marathon ends here. The Gay Pride Festival, they don't have a parade, but the festival happens here, and it's really kind of activated. This is a movie night, so you can get a sense of how this really light and airy structure kind of hugs the people that sit in its center and really kind of provokes an engagement with one another. This is a project in Philadelphia. Anyone heard of Graffiti Pier? Okay. So graffiti was invented in Philadelphia, which they love to tell us New Yorkers this. But so what happened was in the 1970s, coal kind of declined in the state of Pennsylvania, and it left a lot of infrastructure underutilized. And there flourished the cultural production of street art and graffiti. And so we were commissioned to design Pier 18 and Pier 20, which are two of the piers that you see here. The Pier 18, which is considered Graffiti Pier, basically existed in this underground street art world until 2010 when Instagram happened, and it kind of emerged and became the most Instagram spot in Philadelphia. But despite that, so that kind of triggered some liability concerns, and that's why we were commissioned to design a future for this space. Of course, when graffiti writers heard that landscape architects were coming to town, they got really nervous, and they were like, "Oh my God, you're gonna make the High Line." Because graffiti is all about transgression, and so what they did not want was a public park. So what we told the client was that we would actually not do kind of a large kind of public engagement, that we would work to gain the trust of graffiti writers. And so we had a bar tab from the client, and we were meeting graffiti writers one-on-one, kind of off the record. We had anonymous, representatives sent to us, anonymous emails, phone calls. One of the things that we shared with the graffiti writers was that if you do nothing at Graffiti Pier, that was their first question to us was, do you have to do anything? And so the main question, we needed to answer in order to start the conversation. And we said, if you do nothing here, Graffiti Pier will be inundated by high tides on a daily basis in 25 years. So we started to reframe the project as a Save Graffiti Pier project. And we asked everyone across those disparate conversations one question. Something's got to happen. So if it's got to happen, what is the best thing that can happen here, and what is the worst thing that can happen here? And we mapped all of those responses onto this graph. And what you can see is that the best thing is that we don't touch it, and the worst thing is if it's a new park. And as a designer, it's like really hard to hear. But we said, okay, we see some emerging themes, and we said, across those conversations, we heard these 4 things. Ensure the continuation and expansion of art. Keep the site vegetated and passive. Make it safe and accessible without looking safe and accessible, and keeping it gritty. So, once we kind of confirmed that felt resonant to the writers, we went back and, through the course of the project said, here are all the ways in which those 4 guidelines are being worked through into the plan. So, for example, keeping it gritty, I followed up with one of the graffiti writers who said this, and he, I was like, what does gritty mean to you? And he was like, oh, rocks and mud and water. And as he was describing it, it became clear that the ecosystem of graffiti actually intersects with the ecosystem of this historic intertidal marsh. And so we proposed removing the bulkheads and reintroducing an intertidal marsh here on the Delaware River. And so through that process, we came to a landscape design plan that we're continuing to move forward with the client. At a midpoint in the project, we actually took some of the renderings back to the graffiti writers and had them tag onto the early renderings their feedback. And so we kind of worked to decode those tags and integrate into the design. So we developed, for instance, custom site furnishings with kind of in the geometric language of the Jersey barriers that we saw on site, and offering these really expansive surfaces for more graffiti. We continued communication during the pandemic, making a zine with the graffiti writers, and so that was kind of how we continued the dialogue with folks. There's no email newsletter among graffiti writers, if you can imagine. So these are just some before and afters. We're kind of reinterpreting some of the pioneer vegetation into bioswales. A lot of the work is, translating the existing vegetation into more robust and resilient plant palette, but again, kind of keeping the character of this place that was just found. The idea was not to make it look like a park. So this is before and this is after. We've kind of translated this into a shady, shade garden rather. This is before and this is after. I'm out of time, but I'm gonna try to sneak one more in. This is before and this is after. This is above the trestle. This is where they were like, definitely don't make this the high line. So what you see here are just sedums and grasses, making it safe and accessible, and while we kind of keep that character. This is Pier 20. This is the other pier, but basically we were shoring up the sea walls, the pier walls, and introducing that as a surface for artists to be in dialogue with the rising tides. Salome, don't be mad at me. I'm going to be quick. This is the last one. Who's been to Dia Beacon? Great crowd. Okay. It was one of my favorite museums before we got this commission. But for the majority of you know, this museum, this institution, really, this foundation was established as a kind of counter-institution in the 1960s in the midst of a growing environmental movement. And a lot of the work that they've supported over the decades has had a dialogue with land, with change. The word dia itself is an ancient Greek word for through. So a lot of the work is about journey and about land. And so we were commissioned to design 8 acres south of the building, which currently do not figure into the museum experience. And at the time, they said the brief was that we need a path. We need a path. And I was like, I don't want to design a path, so I'm probably not going to do this project. But someone in my office sat me down and was like, look, you want to do whatever you can with DIA. And what 5 years later, looking back on it, what that path really represented was a desire to extend the museum experience into the land. So we, did this project really starting with research, understanding the native history of the land, how the land came to be under the quote-unquote ownership of Europeans, the level of slavery enslaved labor that was here in the region. It's the site's history as a part of the historic river's floodplain, and the many chapters of industry that have been represented in the site's history. So this is a kind of a look at the 8 acres that we were asked to design. This is, much of it was flat lawn. We started to engage Native people, and one of the things that they communicated to us was a spirit of the idea that we are all just passing through, that the landscape persists, but humans, we're all just passing through. And so, whereas in Western traditions, it's common to name people or name landscapes after people, that in the Native tradition, we name people after landscapes because the landscape persists. And so they encouraged us to really make that the spirit of the project. Robert Irwin designed these really iconic gardens in the north part of the building and organized the galleries and all of this around a grid. His thinking was that the grid was kind of this, the most ethical, unhierarchical organization of space. But what it didn't do was really speak to the land itself. The grid flew out of nowhere and landed on the land. The Native folks kind of talked to us about the idea of portage, that this site was a site of crossing the river historically. And so this is a concept sketch that started to take the idea of moving towards the river and surfacing that in the land through a series of sculptural landforms. And in this way, the water could come back to the river, the building would be protected from flooding, and the change in moisture and precipitation would be legible to visitors over the course of their lives. This is a quote from Toni Morrison that stayed with me throughout the course of the project, where she talks about flooding and how they call it flooding, but it's really remembering that water wants to come back to where it once was. I'm going to fly through these a little bit, but we worked with clay to kind of test all of the sculptural qualities of these landforms. We worked with Sherwood design engineers to calibrate the volume of these sculptural landforms to protect the building from flooding. And we really looked to the land itself and the way in which history was inscribed in the land for a series of materials that we would be pulling from. So anything we found on the site, this is a series of sketches that kind of record all the materials that we found on the site, became the material palette for things like the benches and the paths. We are seeding over 90 species of native meadow plants here. Lots of color and texture and seasonality that will be expressed in the land. So the project is currently under construction. So these are just some construction photos that I'll end with by just, bringing it back to the original kind of question about social architecture. And for me, part of the reason since Hurricane Katrina that I've been exploring landscape as social architecture is because of the inherent quality of public, that we have to come together to think about what will happen to the places that we love. And we need places to come together to talk to each other and figure out those futures by defining our priorities and what's most important to us and investing in preserving those over time. So that is pretty much it. Sorry, I'm just gonna, lots of images. But that is it. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. It's really good to be here. The stories that shape us are born in community, not collections. Long before they reach library shelves or museum walls, they live out loud. In hospital rooms and holding cells, on park benches and picket lines, at block parties and baby showers, passing hand to hand like a plate, a flyer, or a prayer. But often, the walls around our institutions are too thick to fully hear us, walls that separate the story from the storyteller, walls that ask people to translate their lives into something more palatable or more legible, and walls that guard power instead of sharing it. My name is Kent Harris.
And my name is Vinay Kumar Mysore.
Together, we're In Good Company, an exhibition design practice shaped by community stories. We create public spaces that help stories live with beauty, depth, and accountability to the people who carry them. And if there's one thing we've learned, it's this. When we let our guard down and begin with trust, the stories we thought we knew make room for the truths we have yet to hear.
So we've been asking, if these walls could drop, what stories would finally be welcomed in? What truths might guide how we understand the world? Who would feel safe enough to step up, not as subjects, but as narrators? And what forms might these stories take? For us, these aren't rhetorical questions, they're design principles. They shape how we move through the world and who we move with. Because we know that the spaces we've built to hold public stories haven't always earned public trust. They've extracted more than they've invited. They've listened without letting go. They've collected stories without sharing authorship. So we need to start somewhere different. We want to show you what that looks like with a recent project, an exhibition that we completed over our past time at New Inc.
Over the past 9 months, we've been in conversation, collaboration, and kinship with community doulas across New Jersey, listening, learning, and co-creating The Courage and Care, a community exhibition that honors their work and wisdom. These doulas are trained birth workers who provide emotional, physical, and advocacy support to birthing people. In the midst of a Black maternal health crisis, where medical neglect and systemic bias continue to harm Black families, they offer a different kind of care, one rooted in trust, tradition, and fierce advocacy. Founded by a foundation that wanted to uplift, hosted by a site that wanted to connect, and shaped by doulas who told us, this story is ours and it has to do more than just sit on a wall. We told stories of lineage tracing back to Black grand midwives, stories of advocacy inside biased hospital systems, and stories of grief, ritual, resistance, and fierce everyday love. And it worked. Poets, policymakers, healthcare leaders, and families stood in that space and felt what becomes possible when institutions don't just invite people in, but let the walls come down.
Now, neither of us are doulas, neither of us have given birth, and neither of us are from New Jersey. We're outsiders. And over almost the past decade, we've worked to refine a practice of coming in as outsiders and working with communities across North America. If you're Wabanaki artists and West African refugees in Maine, longtime DC residents, teens in Anacostia, palliative care patients in Ottawa, Spanish-speaking families in Tijuana, and cultural leaders at Kumeyaay and Filipino in San Diego. And people always ask us, like, how do you even get these stories on the walls when, dude, you're not even from here? And the answer is the wall is the last thing we build. First, we start by getting grounded, listening well, earning trust. We create layered ways for people to participate, compensated in-depth interviews, paid advisory roles. We make sure people own their stories. We bring the tools, co-design, research, interviews, the community leads. And then together, we can start building the relationships and the structures to make community storytelling possible. Then we get the wall. And what people see is the exhibition. What makes it work is everything behind it.
We see exhibitions as social architecture. They don't just show culture, they shape how it's remembered and how it's felt. We also believe exhibitions don't need to start or end in museums. They can happen in barbershops, basements, public libraries, and living rooms. Anywhere someone says, this story matters.
So what stories does your community inherit? And which ones has it yet to remember out loud? What if survival, care, and creativity were treated as cultural treasures? What might our communities become if we made the space and the trust to imagine ourselves anew? If you're a cultural institution, a foundation, a community organization learning how to listen, or a collaborator dreaming of a different way to build, reach out. And we're ready to meet you where you are.
Because when the walls drop, not just the physical ones, but the ones that protect power, we create space for something more human, more honest, and more shared. And that's the future we're building, story by story, space by space. Thank you, and we'd love to connect with you.
Welcome. I'm Dr. Judith Oden-Choi, and I'm here today to represent Writ Large Projects, an independent publisher and literary lab. We started publishing books back in 2007 in Los Angeles. Each of us brings something different to the team. Shiwan is a poet and editor. He's the founder of the Yellow House Library in Lagos, Nigeria, and he mentors young people through the 309 Collective. Peter is a producer and curator. He was the event manager at the Last Bookstore, one of the most famous bookstores in the world. And he's also cataloged the largest collection of Black books in the US. I'm the technologist in the group. I also work with communities to create devised works as speculative design. And for over 2 decades, I've been teaching youth writing, theater, and collaboration, often in job training contexts. So, publishing is an old industry where power is concentrated at the top among a few companies. It's very New York-centric. It's the type of place where who you know matters. And if you're not within those gates, if you are BIPOC, queer, trans, and immigrant, if you didn't go to the right schools, if you live anywhere else in the world, trying to navigate these systems becomes infinitely more difficult. So when we became a publishing company ourselves, we had to reckon with the fact that we too became part of the system. So we asked ourselves, why are we trying to get over that gate? Why aren't we trusting an outdated publishing system with our stories rather than co-creating within our own community? And when we did this, it really shifted our thinking away from focusing on just the product on the book, and shifted our focus to the authors. We really believe that if we focus on author development and fostering supportive literary communities, that we can reshape the publishing industry. So we've distilled our 18 years of experience into a process we call community-based publishing. At its heart is community building and engagement, and which includes events and activations that strengthens community and makes writing more accessible. Events like Drunken Masters, our work in progress series where emerging writers read new work to a panel of established and drunk writers for feedback. Or our series of public activations in spaces like parks, train stations, and bodegas called Publish, You Can Too, which invites everyone to become a writer and share their stories. The next piece of the puzzle is education. And we've run workshops at public libraries, hosted writing groups, and we've mentored young writers who've organized their own festival, the You Write Like a Teen Literary Festival, in its 2nd iteration this summer. Publishing is actually a small fraction of what writers spend their lives and careers doing. But we really work to make sure that our writers' books are something that is meaningful to their careers and speak to their communities. For example, Tracy Kato Kiriyama is an activist and is the founder and organizer of Tuesday Night Cafe, the longest-running Asian American arts venue in the country. We worked with her for over 10 years to edit her poems and essays together into this collection. But now she has this as a representation of how her arts and activism work together. Bridget Bianca is a fabulous writer. When we signed her on, she had written 4 poems of this manuscript. But she's also an amazing writing teacher who works to bring liberatory practices and trauma-informed practices into the college writing classroom. She wrote a teaching guide to her own book, and so we put out a 2nd edition that could include that teaching guide. You can find that in the demo store. I hope it's starting to become clear what exactly we mean by author development. But another piece of it now that's really important is ancillary media. So we also work with authors to help them develop media, such as podcasts and newsletters, to support their titles. The first podcast that we co-produced was one for Chiwon's own book. The podcast is Are You There, Ghost? It's me, Chiwon, where he interviews writers about their paranormal experiences. Ernest Hardy is publishing his upcoming book, Emotional Anthropology, with us. It's key that this book is contextualized in a tradition of queer Black thought and aesthetics. And so we worked with him to develop a weekly newsletter that he's started putting out. Now, writing communities tend to be hyper-local. But if we are going to work to bypass those gatekeepers, we need to be in solidarity. We experienced this in Southern California, where because of geography and affinity, there are many small writing communities that rarely collaborated. So in order to build those coalitions, we organized a decentralized literary festival that spanned the summer. We co-produced at least one event each day for 90 days in order to create a conversation across these many communities. We've run this festival twice. So now we have this amazing opportunity to open our first physical headquarters, a pilot lab in the historic borough of Braddock, Pennsylvania, the home of U.S. Steel and the very first Carnegie Library, just outside of Pittsburgh, where she and I now live. Pittsburgh's a lot more than a football town. You know, it's home of legendary artists like August Wilson and Andy Warhol, and the Center for African American Poetry and Poetics in Covey Common. And thanks to Allegheny County, we now own this 5,000 square foot plus building. Yeah, thank you. This is where we will implement, experiment, learn in and with community to help find and develop new authors and work together to reshape this publishing industry. And as we grow, we will expand our programming so that we can offer daily classes and workshops for adults and youth, online and offline, as well as employment training and career guidance for writers, editors, booksellers, and cultural organizers. We will also have a media lab and offer producing services to help authors create those newsletters, podcasts, and live stream events to support their work. Our plan is to spread this community-based publishing model around the country, supporting local literary communities that can connect, celebrate, and elevate each other. So please, join us in this journey. Invest in Writ Large, invest in Braddock, and please talk to us about how you can help us open Writ Large Literary Laboratory. Thank you.
Y échale, compay. ¿Y quién lo diría? ¿Y quién lo diría? Que la vida en la montaña es una fiesta de noche y día. ¿Quién lo diría? ¿Quién? ¿Quién lo diría? Que la vida en la montaña es una fiesta de noche y día. In the central mountains of Puerto Rico, there is a small town called Adjuntas. And there is a high point called Cerro Mágico, where you can see both the Caribbean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. At the bottom of the mountain, there is the the town called Adjuntas, where I was born and raised. I am Hernando Dovilio.
And I am Noah Garcia. Together with Barış Göktürk and Oscar Rene Conejo, we represent JUNTE, a land, art, and culture collective. We're excited to show you the projects we brought to life and to invite you to be a part of the Arts Center we're currently working on.
In Adjuntas, there is a rich artistic community hungry for creative outlets. These talented individuals often feel the pressure to move out of the island for better opportunities. So we started JUNTE with the idea that talented people can not only thrive in Adjuntas, but can have their voices heard beyond the island, reaching people all over the world, including everyone in this room today. JUNTE, which means get together in Spanish, originally formed with 8 core members and since has evolved. Our history began in 2017 with the construction of a dance platform in the top of the mountain, priorities. Because we, in the Caribbean, has a gift that allows us to see the life through the lens of dancing and music. Dancing can also be an alternative space for us, the artists, to dream and create and design a world following our own perceptions. In this sense, the platform did so much more. On it, we host exhibitions, skill-sharing workshops, performances that celebrate both contemporary and traditional Puerto Rican culture, as well as hosting emergency meetings after the Hurricane Maria to coordinate FEMA assistance. And as recently as this summer, we created a music group, Memoria Futura, where I am part of, and will be playing in Spain next July. Based on the success of this event, we were invited to bring our platform for other locations. These projects include a collaboration with an all-female barber collective, La Barbera, who gave haircuts to the students inside the barricades of the University of Puerto Rico during the student strike, while talking about the future of the island. A crayon-making workshop using the local red clay from the land. A solidarity performance at Socrates Sculpture Park during the earthquake in Mexico and the hurricane in Puerto Rico. And today, as part of our commitment of elevating Puerto Rican creative, we are beyond the island, we are showcasing the work here with a totem in this building.
In anticipation of working together toward our larger goal of building an arts center on the land, we built 2 totems, one here today and one is at Adjuntas. We've conceived of the totem as a strategy for bringing together carpenters, masons, metalsmiths, musicians, and storytellers. The totem is made up of a series of modular components capturing all the materials and trades that will be needed to build a larger art center. The totem served as both a mock-up as well as a rehearsal for how all the builders will work together. In addition to constructing the totem, we hosted workshops to gather information about how the structure could best serve the community. We are now at a critical juncture to follow through with the construction of the art center. We're creating one zone for housing artists and another for making art. Our process for building, whether it's a platform or an art center or a totem, is highly inclusive and collaborative. While working on this project, we kept going back to what's known as the stone soup parable. As the story goes, a villager arrives in a town with just a pot of water and a stone. Through curiosity and contribution from the city, a feast emerges. In JUNTE's case, our soup is called sancocho. It begins with a villager climbing into the mountains of Adjuntas with nothing but a stone and a pot. They build a fire, boil water, and drop in a stone. Here's our village, 5 acres of lush forest. Here's our pot, a platform for gatherings, music, and art. A curious kid approaches the villager, asks, "What are you making?" "Stone soup," she replies. "How does it taste?" "It's good, but it could use a few more ingredients. It could use some peas." The kid jumps up in excitement. "My dad's a pea farmer." He runs off, returns with the peas and a curious group of people. The villager tasted again. "It's good, but it could use a few more ingredients." Each ingredient by ingredient, is offered by the community until the pot overflows. In the end, the villager takes out the stone and the community celebrates with a feast and a dance party. This is how Junte grows. Not with a top-down directive, but with collaborative buy-in from each member from the whole community. Each person adds something: skills, time, a story, a song. The Arts Center we're building today is no different. We're here today to invite you to be a part of our soup.
We want you to experience the culture that Adjuntas has to offer, to dream with us, and to be part of building the community. This is our invitation. Our next goal, as we said, is to build the Arts Center, so we will serve as a host of performance, exhibition, and also it could serve as extended stays.
In terms of what we have, we've acquired the land, earned community support, retained an architect, yours truly, and secured select trades, including woodworkers, metalsmiths, and masons. There are a few more critical things we need to solidify, including select engineers and the secret ingredient of financial partners. We have 3 specific goals with today's talk. 1 is to raise awareness, 2 is to solicit support, 3 is to build connections. Help us spread the word and come visit the land. We've launched a partnership campaign outlining ways that you can get involved, including in-kind donations, hands-on contributions, and financial support. You can visit our website to find out more details. The soup is good, but could use a few more ingredients. Dale.
Finally, my question is, what's our next stop? We're at Juntas, Puerto Rico. Okay, see you después de Puerto Rico. ¿Quién lo diría? ¿Y quién lo diría? ¿Quién lo diría? Que la vida en la montaña es una fiesta de noche y día. ¿Y quién lo diría?
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Anna Campbell. Today I am talking to you about a work in progress against our erosion. The first iteration is on view here at DEMO, and it's a video montage of oral histories and a sculptural installation. And it's about the historically queer, trans, POC, and working class People's Beach at Reese Park. Works? There we go. I've been describing my works to folks for the last year or so, and on a couple occasions, folks would mishear free speech instead of re-speech. And it's a productive slippage because the beach is fundamentally a microcosm of how freedom is manifest for queer, trans, POC, and working class people, and the many challenges and points of friction and erosion of that freedom. So, a quick Reese 101. Reese Beach is in the Rockaways. It has been named after Jacob Riis for over 100 years, the social reformer and photojournalist. Its defining landmark for many years has been this first tubercular hospital for children, later a nursing home, and later still an abandoned building that provided cover for queer people in Bays 1 and 2 for many decades. We know that Reese has been a queer space since at least the 40s. We know from arrest records. But many researchers suspect that that legacy is longer. And of course, this is just a fraction of the story of this beach that's sited on colonized indigenous land. So in 2022, developers signed a lease to renovate the nearby bathhouse, and that really raised a lot of concerns about gentrification. And then 1 year after, in 2023, the Ponset Hospital and all its adjacent buildings were demolished. And then in that same year, the Army Corps of Engineers attempted a beach replenishment effort that has eroded far, far ahead of schedule. So this year, Bay 1 is closed again. But in the face of all of this, there is a lot of mutual aid that is ongoing. So that includes the return of an accessible beach mat, and also the recruitment and training of a care team to mediate between beachgoers and the police that's recently launched. So many organizations, formal and informal, are working to preserve and expand the beach's use. I come to this as a professor of art and gender and women's studies, as a white academic who divides my time between Madison, Wisconsin and New York City, as a former public art council worker, as a designer of editions that I call prefigurative merch, and as a queer person who learned to float for the very first time in my 40s at Race Beach. Work that honors activists and cultural workers has been important to me for a long time. An example of this is Archivist Fingers. It's a site-specific bronze installation at the Lesbian Herstory Archives in Brooklyn, and it honors its archivist with 5 casts of bronze fingers that can be attached to the library's archival ladder. So I'm wanting to continue those efforts to honor and amplify the work of activists and cultural workers. And in doing this project, I've already learned so much from so many people. And this is just a brief snapshot. So Kyan Doroshow, the founder of Glitz, here center right, Reese Porn and the organizers of the Ms. Columbia Beach Walk, Jay Wortham, whose work precedes this project and has just been a brilliant research at every turn to enjoy. And then Jolly Sayers, Lex Barlow, Dash Pintero, and Sophia Riddle, who together make up the research group, Two Eyes, and wrote We Come in Waves, an oral history guide. And that's a guide that I use in my own work. And it's been really exciting to understand that in working with this resource, I'm able to not only just create the audio track collaboratively with folks that I'm interviewing, but also have that audio and transcripts be added to the research group's own archive. So, Against Our Erosion, some logistics and details. It is a multi-screen immersive video art installation. And here at Demo, it is in a single projection that operates in 3 acts. The first act is narrating the significance of Reach Beach broadly. The second deals with the Neponset Hospital's demolition. And then the third talks about landmarking and memorialization. The final installation will include and expand each of these acts and then add new projections for a series of topics, including the late iconic Ms. Columbia, Reset Night, and other profiles in activist culture and preservation campaigns. And the ethics that ground this work have been really important for me. So I'm using the love language of bureaucracy and grant funding to financially compensate people for these oral histories, regardless of whether they're documented or undocumented, and without requiring paperwork that would dead name folks. Also, I'm cautious that visibility is increasingly a trap, and so the footage that I'm using is focused on immersion in water and nature rather than capturing subjects. The sculptural component of this work is about creating sandcastle molds of the Neponset Hospital as a way to essentially rebuild that which has been demolished. And paradoxically, I'm able to create some pretty accurate models because the contract of the demolition of the hospital was open for bids, and so you can find the blueprints for the hospital online. I also want to be clear that I'm not fetishizing the Neponset Hospital building itself, but rather insisting, along with many other activists and artists, that what must critically be preserved at this site is not a building, but safety, community, legacies of historical and ancestral connection, and care for queer, trans, POC, and working class people. So here are just a couple Instagram handles for some of the folks that I mentioned if you're curious to follow what's going on at the beach. And if you're a queer person who has a connection to Reese and you'd like to talk to me, let's be in touch. If you are a museum or gallery worker and you would love to hear more about the extended version of this project, let's schedule a studio visit. And if you're someone who's interested in helping me produce an edition of sandcastle molds as a rhizomatic public art installation, as an accessory for pleasure activism, as a fundraiser to support advocacy and activism at Reese Beach, or any of those things altogether, let's strategize. Thank you to New Ink and my social architecture cohort, Isabel Flower, my mentor Tamsin Dillon, and to all of the activists, artists, and culture workers who make this research possible. Thank you.
Hello, my name's Emma Jurczynski. I'm an architectural designer and self-proclaimed hoarder. I'm here to talk to you about patchwork. One thing's for sure, we've all been affected by construction in New York City. Whether it's a rerouted subway or the cacophony of jackhammers on our morning commute. But it's sidewalks like these that pull on this hoarder's heartstrings. Construction and demolition debris account for over 30% of global waste production, significantly impacting the health of both our people and planet. There is 6 million tons of construction debris generated per year in New York City alone. For comparison, that's 16.5 times the weight of the Empire State Building. This is the Mies van der Rohe Barcelona Pavilion, a modernist icon. If modernism has changed our cultural perception of architecture towards newness, seamlessness, and assumed material value, how can we design an alternative? An architecture unafraid of seams. One which finds ordinariness and irregularity as an opportunity for material reimagination. This is my recreation of the pavilion built out of fruit crates. But what does it take to build in this way? How can we utilize design to divert material away from landfill and back into our buildings? And how can we engage our community in the process? I'm going to talk about my practice, a collaboration with those around me to design and build a prototype called Patchwork. And it's on view right over there, so I encourage you to check it out. We begin at the source. This project is using standardized wood because it's ubiquitous in our construction industry. The ease at which we use it is reflected in the speed at which we throw it away. There is just so much wood, and the more wood we use, the less carbon stored in it is released. But this proposal is applicable to many construction materials. The wood was collected gradually from all over the city, most significantly with the support of 3 like-minded workshops, Trilocks, Sawkill Lumber, and Coadaptive, who had scraps and reclaimed material available and were generous enough to save them for me. The collection of these pieces create an archive of the city similar to the one that exists at Sawkill Lumber's workshop in Bed-Stuy. The pieces have histories, stories, and past lives embedded on the surface of the material, and whether it's Winston Churchill's yacht or the Chelsea Hotel, everybody loves a story. And these stories are captured in the material inventory. Design. Born from a handbook I made about methods of joining and storing used wood, Patchwork came by its name honestly. I was inspired by methods of repair, a movement that's captured the fashion and neighboring industries. However, I was taken by shishiko, a Japanese method of mending where you overlay a hole with a secondary piece of fabric and reinforce the surrounding fibers with a stitching pattern. Both a beautiful metaphor and very structurally sound. I translated this idea into the connecting plates known as gusset plates. By creating a pre-drilled pattern in the wood, Molly and I were able to embed an existing knowledge into the surface of the material. By following the pattern of the grid, the alignment of hardware to structure creates a constellation-like pattern of screws on the surface of the material, or I like to consider them as the silver jewelry of the piece. The design for Patchwork was based off of the truss, the most structurally sound assembly of members. It allows small pieces to exist in larger structures, and it demonstrates the potential for this prototype to scale. In order to optimize the process, I experimented using the Digital Circularity Toolkit. It's an open source software developed by Keith J. Lee that uses an optimal matching algorithm to map a material inventory onto a target shape. As the design changes, the algorithm responds. Once the structural design is finalized, you can scrub through to rapidly test design options. I worked between the digital and the physical to organize the pieces, but for this deadline, human intuition prevailed. Prototype. In preparation for Patchwork, I built a few prototypes at 1-to-1 scale. They're represented as furniture pieces simply to load test them with human weight. Built 2 from scrap, they demonstrate how simple and straightforward systems could begin to challenge our existing linear economy. Patchwork was built during a one-day workshop with the help of 7 friends. In order to engage a group of people with varying levels of construction experience and share in the process, I created an IKEA-like manual, inspired by one I made earlier. This was a collaboration with IKEA to build an open source structure to spend one night in nature. However, this time I was in charge of fabrication, so I created a layout plan. The numbers and letters correspond to the collected pieces, carefully documented, creating a kit of parts for the build. John and I taped together 140 11x17s to create a 1-to-1 scale drawing as a template for construction. Assemble. Over the course of one day at Sawkill Lumber, we put the work in Patchwork. We drilled and drilled and drilled, and talked and drilled, and adjusted and drilled. We built one face and then the other, and joined it together, with the necessary improvisation along the way. We created an arch. It has walls and a roof, something you can feel enclosed in for just one moment. And this was the aftermath. So what's next? How can a joint become a pavilion, a pixel, an infrastructure? And what other designs are possible? Through resourceful and creative use of our existing materials, how can we generate demand for an alternative way of building at both small and large scales? And what social efficiencies can grow from this? This project would not have been possible without the help of Sawkill Lumber, Trilocks, Keith J. Lee, Co-Adaptive, and New Ink, who I'm extremely grateful for their support. And to everyone helped along the way, thank you. So, this is Patchwork. It's a structural patchwork built from discarded wood from New York City. It's a physical portal to an alternative future built collectively. So I invite you to think creatively about what you use, what you waste, and how you can engage your community to build a different future. And please get in touch to continue the conversation. It would truly make this hoarder happy.
Hi, I am Isabel Flower. I am the mentor in residence for the social architecture track. I would first just like to express my appreciation for everyone on the stage. I've learned so much from being around all of y'all this year. And I can attest from firsthand experience that the work that you just heard about is 100% committedly from the heart. So the practitioners here today share a desire to break down walls, in the words of Vinay and Kent in the first presentation. And they really see with such clarity the discrepancy between who is telling stories and who those stories are actually about. They're identifying architectures, whether physical or social or relational, that reveal social hierarchies that manipulate design, manipulate narrative, and manipulate how decisions are made. But what they also share is that they believe that we could do things differently, and that it is indeed possible to make something that is more horizontal, more participatory, more responsive, and made with the many in mind instead of just the few. So on that note, I would like to ask them something, which is actually inspired by Judith in Writ Large's presentation, when she spoke about moving away from thinking about the end goal as the ideal product, and instead, what if the end goal was the relationship that you had with the people who you work with, the people you're serving, the people who are in your life. So I think that everyone on the stage shares that value, and I would like to ask you all, what is a priority in your practice that you feel like you have created in contradiction to how you were taught, or in contradiction to how possibly you've worked in the past? What's something, a priority that you have designed that you feel like really reflects your intentions?
I can go ahead and start.
Whoever.
So one version of this project would be about essentially stacking as many interviews and scheduling those basically as efficiently as possible. And that's something I'm trying really not to do, and to essentially move intentionally and build relationships and connect with community and become part of community as the way to kind of create a groundwork that is about, really thinking about what would the dynamics of a generative conversation actually look like, and putting that more towards the priority.
So Kent and I's interest is in thinking about how design, memories, the memories we have, the mythologies that we hold, how that can change and shape our public imagination. And what you're taught in design school is, you start with a blank sheet of paper and a good concept. And I think for us, we take a different approach to thinking about where does design start. I think it has to start in conversation, and it starts in community. And from there, we can move to these questions that we might think about.
So as a writer, especially coming up a certain time in certain MFA programs, it's all about craft and skill and learning how to use language. And I think one value that we've really tried to embrace is the focus on voice, on a focus on how do you reflect who you are and your unique voice, and that is what we're striving for, not some sort of objective idea of skill, not some sort of objective out there that might be of this is how crafty, how my virtuosity that was used so well yesterday in a talk, so I don't want to take that word and use it negatively here, but that is not necessarily the thing that, we've got AI bots spitting out mechanical uses of language all the time. We don't need that. We need your unique voice and story.
I think similarly to you, the word of efficiencies is something I think about a lot from past experience. Optimizing efficiency for known reason has always been a priority, but this work, as I think many does, it looks for efficiencies elsewhere and how to create a different hierarchy within those to prioritize what's of value. And similarly for me, that's building opportunities to work with people and in communities with those around.
And for us in JUNTE, I think that constant has been to exploring out of our comfort zone. So for me, I can do speech, but in English. I can do music, but can I do art? So at the end, all of this process has help us to become, better persons, so that's it.
I think we can quickly ask one more, and maybe not everyone will answer. Let's see. Listening. Listening is something that came up in a lot of your presentations, and I think that if you're a social practitioner, you spend your entire life getting better at listening. It's not something you can ever be good enough at. It is really the core, because not only do you need to hear, but you need to take what you hear and do something with it and see when you're wrong and change. So I'd like to ask maybe a few of you, what's a learning that has made you a better listener in your work?
Kill your intentions. Forget your mission statement, that values list, anything that you have that you hold in your mind that tells you that you're a good person, therefore you're going to make good art. Forget about that so that you can actually come to the table and listen to what your collaborators are telling you.
Yeah, for us, it's pretty much like the stone soup parable, just to be open to who's going to involve in the group and what they can add to it. So I think that listening in a way would be like to be open.
It's a slightly different angle, but I think do your homework. For us, we always are showing up in different communities and having conversations. There's always this question of like, what do you guys really know about us? Like, have you taken the time to understand and appreciate as best you can who we are, where we're from, where we're at? And there's always these little moments like, do you know about Black Grand Midwives? Do you know about the Shilsol Bay first sort of construction there? Do you know? And it comes in with a reaction or a little something. And I think that's the moment where a conversation can shift, where either we can have an opportunity for a deeper conversation about who we are and why we are and how we come into the places that we are, or one where we're like, it's kind of sus. Yeah.
Maybe two things. One is the idea that, and I've learned this from the folks that I've been talking to, that it's really important to set the stage and create that environment that's going to be the space for a really strong conversation. And so that relates a lot to what you're saying, the groundwork needs to be laid in many ways. And another thing is, with this particular project, what you're hearing in the video is these great conversations that I've had with folks. But what you're also hearing is the sound of the ocean and the sound of the water meeting the land. And so in this instance, for this particular kind of work, thinking about the envelope of who we listen to needs to also expand and think about environment and how that is also a really key part of the story.
It's a hard note to end on. I would say there's just so much to learn. There's so much to learn from everyone on the stage, from everyone participating in New Ink. And I can't really build upon what was said about how you come to the table, who we listen to, but I've learned so much from everyone who I've collaborated in this project with skill sets far beyond mine that have just brought so much richness, including the social architecture track and Isabel.
Thank you. We're perfectly on time. Wow. Thank you all so much. I'm just in awe of you, and thank you all for listening.